Hi, everybody. My name is Haley from ProWritingAid, and I just want to thank you for joining us at another session at ProWritingAid for Writers. This session is led by Sue Campbell, who trained under Tim Grahl of BookLaunch.com. She helps authors embrace their roles as book marketers and build the audience their work deserves. She's worked with award-winning fiction and nonfiction authors. We are just so thrilled to have her here today, so welcome, Sue.
Thanks so much, Haley. I'm so excited to be here talking to writers and helping them get less scared about marketing is one of my favorite things. So today I want to talk about all of those tactics that you see out in the world and on the internet, how they're not going to work for you unless you put them into a cohesive strategy. So we're going to look at a 4-part framework that will help you actually grow your audience rather than just kind of throw spaghetti at the wall and wait for a miracle to happen. So as Haley said, I'm Sue Campbell. I'm part of Pages and Platforms, and I work with 2 developmental editors, Anne Hawley and Rochelle Ramirez, and we want authors to think holistically about their careers. So Anne and Rochelle are going to help you write the best story possible, and then I am going to help you get that story out into the world. Whether you're traditionally published or independently published, we want to help authors succeed on a holistic level, because nowadays authors have to do it all and be it all. So before we start, I would love for you to grab a pen and a notebook and take notes. It's going to help you retain this information. It's going to help you generate ideas and really engage with the content I'm going to give you today, which is going to be everything that you need to know to get started with a very, very sound book marketing strategy. And I do recommend turning off your phone, minimizing any distractions, just so you can really tune in and start thinking in your head, how am I going to apply this to my particular situation? Because there's a lot of customization that needs to happen. And as Haley said, you can chat, make sure you're chatting to who you want to chat to. In the chat right now, I would love for you to share with me, what is your biggest marketing challenge, right? When you think about doing marketing for your book, or when you're doing your marketing for your book, what is your biggest challenge? There's so much to do. Demonstrating I have an audience, fear of marketing and getting out there, no idea where to start, how to best get my name out there, imposter syndrome, getting traffic for articles on my site, building my platform, selling books, lack of a plan. These are all great, yes. Finding an agent, I want traditional publishing, yes. So marketing is a part of that. Where to start, not making progress with podcast pitches. Okay, excellent. This is great. This is going to be so helpful for you today. So writers, usually we want to write, right? I'm a writer too. I'm an author. I love writing. Luckily, I got sucked into the marketing side kind of by accident and realized it can also be really, really wonderful. But usually as writers, we just want to write. We don't want to spend time marketing, but most of us have realized that in our current climate and circumstances, authors have to be willing to do their marketing. A lot of you said you don't know where to start. A lot of you said you're confused and you're overwhelmed. So we're going to address all of that today. You just want some clarity around what's going to give you the best results for your efforts, right? If I have to do this marketing stuff, I have a limited amount of time to do it in, and I want to make sure that what I'm doing is actually effective. So that's what we're going to look at today. We are going to learn, number 1, why marketing your book using all of those slapdash techniques you read in articles on the internet is really likely to fail and not move the needle for you on book sales at all. We'll look at a better definition of marketing. We're going to talk about your number 1 book marketing goal. This is the thing you should be focused on more than anything else. And we're going to look at that 4-part book marketing strategy that's going to actually grow your audience and produce results for you. So let's go ahead and dive in. Number 1, right? You find all of these tactics on the internet. If you search the internet for book marketing, how do I market my book, author book marketing, if you search for any of those things, you find a ton of articles, obviously thousands of pages. But the problem is a lot of those, almost all of them, are just tactics. They're not strategy. So a tactic is, I'll start a Pinterest account and I will do that, or I will start a Twitter account, or I will blog, or I will guest post. These are all strategies. They're all tactics, and they're not a strategy. You're not plugging them into a bigger picture that's goal is to build your career and your book sales over time. Most of these articles are just really bite-sized and clickbaity, designed to get you to click on it and read it, but they only have time to tell you a little bit because attention spans are short, yada, 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 right? So I've seen articles like 100 marketing things that you can do in 10 minutes at a time, right? And when I read through the list with my professional book marketer lens, I'm like, oh boy, like don't waste your 10 minutes, right? A lot of them don't focus on return on investment. So the amount of time and energy and money that you're spending and actually getting measurable results. And then a lot of them have one size fits all mentality, right? Surely not every author should have a Pinterest account, right? We're a very diverse group of people. Yes, we all write books, but we have very, very different audiences and different needs. So your particular strategy has to be customized to your specific reader. So that's just some of the problems with a lot of the marketing advice that you find on the internet when you're just sort of casually searching and starting your research of how do I tackle this. So I want to start, before I tell you about the strategy, I want to tell you what this strategy is based on. It's based on a much better definition of marketing, because I wish I didn't even have to use the word marketing. Some of us, many of us, tend to define marketing by its worst examples. So the spam phone calls that I get a couple of times a day, or the person who tried to sell me a car at a used car lot, or, you know, whatever, anyone can name their sort of type of marketing that they absolutely hate. When we are talking about what we're doing today, I don't want you to think of it as marketing, because that will put a lot of you in a negative frame of mind and you won't be excited to do it. And if you're not excited to do your marketing, that's going to come across in everything that you do. So we're going to start with a better definition, which is we're going to build long-lasting connections with readers. And readers are some of the most amazing people in the whole wide world, right? Those hardcore readers who are buying all the books, that's who we want to reach. Why wouldn't we want to build a long-lasting connection with them? So it's not about selling just this one book. It's not about pushing your book at as many people as you possibly can and always being me, 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 buy my book. It's about building a relationship with readers. So now that we do that, we know that that's our definition, we can start to look at our strategy. So strategy has to start with your primary goal to underpin that strategy. And I'm actually going to get to that in a second, because I need to tell you a little more before you understand why that is your number one goal. So let's start looking at that foundational 4-part book marketing strategy that's going to grow your audience. So it's called the connection system, and this was developed by my mentor, Tim Grahl. Tim is kind of a phenom in the book marketing space, and he's worked with many best-selling authors. At one point, he had 5 clients on the New York Times bestseller list, not the Amazon bestseller list, the New York Times bestseller list, all at the same time. In the same week, he had 5 clients on it. He has perfected this system. He's a very data-driven guy. So he has assembled this strategy that can be adapted to all authors if you make the right tweaks. But let's look at the fundamentals of the strategy, because it can be the same for each of you. So the first step is permission. We'll talk about that in a moment. We'll go through all of these. The next is content, which is where you're going to want to be because you're a writer and you like producing content, but I'll give you some caution about that. And we'll talk about outreach, which is really the magic key ingredient in all of this. And then we'll talk about selling, and that's the 4th piece. So 4-part system. Let's look at permission first. So permission marketing, if you're familiar with the term, it's basically that people are allowing you into their digital or physical space. Okay, so for example, Back when we used to be able to go to events and conferences, if you sat in an audience to listen to a speaker, you were giving them permission to talk to you. Today, coming to this webinar, you're giving me permission to talk to you, right? It's a non-pushy form of marketing because that person is already saying, yes, I'm inviting this message. So you're not up in somebody's face who doesn't want to hear what you have to say. And permission lets you get people's attention and drive action to build that relationship, to build that connection we were talking about. Social media is another form of permission, but it's not a great form of permission for actually selling books. Social media does not sell books very well at all. If you think about it, it actually makes sense. Twitter, for example, is just a fire hose, right? You're drinking from a fire hose. If I am a reader going on there, I'm not looking to buy a book when I'm looking to go on Twitter. I'm looking to be social. And the type of action somebody can get me to take is, it's much easier for me to just, hit the retweet button or hit the heart button, and that's it. And as authors, we need people to actually click through, buy the book, click through, join our mailing list. We need to take more meaningful action. So social media is not a great tool for selling books. If you launch your book, the day that your book comes out, you tweet about it, and then you send an email to your mailing list. And we'll talk about that in a moment. You will sell between 5 and 20 books to your email list for every one book you sell from someone clicking through and actually buying your book on Twitter. Really important to keep that in mind, because that brings us back to our number one book marketing goal. Our number one book marketing goal is to build our email list. Build that permission asset of an email list over all other forms of permission, because you have a chance to build that connection. We start with the definition of building a long-lasting connection with people. Email is currently, and has been for a long time, and will be for the foreseeable future, the very best way to do that. Okay, so let's look at an example of how this works for a real author. So James Clear wrote a wonderful book called Atomic Habits, but he did that because he got a book deal because he had already built a huge following of email subscribers. So he started blogging on the topic, making it extremely actionable and engaging for people, great content. He built that audience through blogging, and he converted those website visitors into email subscribers. So that publisher knew, this guy's going to sell a ton of books. He already has 100,000 people that he can reach anytime he wants. So he got a book deal, and he's continued to grow his list. And now he has sold over 2 million copies of Atomic Habits. Now, I'm showing you this as an example. He is, of course, a bit of a unicorn. So I'm not promising these kind of results, but the dramatic results can illustrate really beautifully these types of concepts. If you can get an engaged audience, doesn't even have to be 100,000 people, you will have that audience for as long as it continues to benefit them, as long as you entertain them, inform them, whatever your mission is as a writer. So really important to grow that email list. Many, many people have gotten book deals, traditional book deals, as a result of the audience they're already bringing to the table. And many independently published authors are successful because they have built up a following that they can control through their email list. So this part of the connection system, it requires you to set up that permission asset, right? You need a website. Your website's number one goal is what? To build your email list, right? To convert all of the people who visit, as many of the people as you can, from casual visitors to subscribers. So you need a website, you need an email service like MailChimp or ConvertKit, you need sign-up forms on your website, you need a reader magnet, you need a freebie, something to trade, right? You're going to give the reader something of value in exchange for their email address, which is incredibly valuable to both of you as well. So sign-up incentives are really important, and we'll talk a little bit about reader personas at the end, but I'll point you to that webinar so you can learn more. The type of sign-up incentive you're going to offer should be directly based on the type of reader who would be perfect for your book. And then you need a welcome email sequence. So these are 5 setup pieces that you need to have done in order for the connection system to work for you. Because if you start to execute other parts of the system, it's like a leaky bucket, right? You can't build the long-lasting connection because people only get exposed to you once, because you can't keep reaching them through your email. Okay, so that is the first part, permission. Second part now, we are on content. So content is all of the material that you put out into the world that helps people decide if you're a good fit and helps keep that relationship strong, keep building that relationship. So content is the comfort zone for a lot of writers. We're like, yeah, I'll write some blogs, I'll write a newsletter, I'll go write some guest articles, no problem, wonderful. So content can be any of those things. It's your blog post, your newsletter, your social posts, your podcasts, your guest blogs. Anything you put out on social media is actually content, right? Any little blips that you write anywhere are content. Posts on Medium, any workbooks you create, videos you make, Q&As you do, case studies you put out. All of these are forms of content. And again, I encourage you to think of what is the content that's going to best serve my ideal reader, right? You want to be very, very clear and always be giving that ideal reader exactly what they want or what they need. So when it comes to content, there are some things that you must have for the system to work. You need that email sequence to welcome new subscribers, as I mentioned back in permission. You need a regular newsletter for subscribers. A lot of authors make the mistake of building up their subscriber list and collecting the emails, and then they sort of fall off the wagon and they're not regularly in touch with that audience, right? It's like the friend who calls out of the blue only when they need something, right? I'm moving, can you come and help me move? Well, I haven't talked to you in 2 years, right? We can't do that. We want to keep cultivating that relationship and providing value to that reader. If some authors actually feel like I'm doing them a favor because I'm only going to bother that person and send them an email when I have a new book out because that's what they care about. But it actually creates the opposite impression, right? That you only care about selling books and you only care about that reader when it's time for them to give you money to buy a book. That's not what we want to have. Plus, people just forget. They're like, I don't remember who this person is. I signed up for this 2 years ago. I'm going to mark it as spam. Really important to be regular. It doesn't have to be every week. It can be once a month, as long as you set a schedule and pretty much stick to it. And then, of course, you need content to use with influencers. And really, this one should be like bold and throbbing on the screen, because this is, as we get into the next step, you'll see influencers and your outreach is where the growth comes from. If all we do is set up a permission asset, set up our email list, and then drip out content to that audience, we're going to grow very, very slowly. We're just basically waiting for people to stumble into our spider web, that is our website, and relying on search engine optimization, and that's it. We're going to grow very slowly. We're going to get disheartened and frustrated that the system isn't working. So the missing piece of this, and this is really where the most bang and benefit comes from, is outreach. So outreach is simply moving people from not knowing you exist to now knowing that you exist. It's the magic ingredient, because you need to get out into the world where your ideal reader is probably hiding, interacting, lurking, whatever they're doing, where they are, where they live. It's your job to get in front of them, to make friends, invite them over, establish that relationship. So once you have your permission set up, and once you have your basic content that you're going to keep writing out, I want you to keep that content very, very simple while your audience is still small. And I want you to focus on outreach. 80 to 90% of your marketing energy should be on outreach, with the goal of getting them back to your email list. And I'll show you how the system works in practice to do that as we go along. So, but first let's talk about influencers. So a lot of people get confused about influencers. So like, is that just like A millennial who's taking pictures of themselves on Instagram in sunglasses and hats, right? Those are influencers, right? An influencer for our purposes is anyone who can get other people to buy your book and become your fan. So that can be other authors in your genre, bloggers, book reviewers, podcasters, people who book events or like radio programs or TV programs, the people who do the booking, journalists, librarians, people just with large social followings and email lists. There are ways to use other people's social followings, right? Leverage a huge audience that someone else has already built rather than try to build your own huge social following, because you know it's better to invest your time in building a huge email following, but it doesn't mean you can't use social at all. So those are different types of influencers. This is not an exhaustive list. It's just to get you to really think about it. I have a lot of writers who I talk to who get really hung up on one type of influencer, right? They're just like, no, it's just other authors in my genre, or it's just book reviewers. And it's not. You have to really think broadly so that you can figure out, again, who's the best influencer to reach my ideal reader. And then I break outreach out into 7 different steps, because I found outreach was, it's the magic ingredient, but it's also the trickiest and most nuanced and most multi-step of all of the pieces of the connection system. So step 1, I like to call get your mind right? I consider myself a book marketing coach and a mindset coach, because if all I did was hand you a checklist of things that you should do to market your book, 90% of authors would never do them because they would get tripped up on the mindset piece. They would feel yucky about marketing, or they would feel like they're annoying people, or they would feel like their book is not good enough. So the first step is you have to get a hold on managing your own brain and figuring out how you're going to frame this for yourself in a way that gives you the energy to carry this out. So that's step 1 of outreach. Step 2 is to set your goals, right? If you're just like dabbling, well, I'm going to try to pitch this podcast, right? That's not going to cut it and give you the sort of momentum and massive action that you need to move the needle. So I always encourage people to set specific goals. For example, I have an outreach intensive where it's a group coaching program. Everybody comes together, and for 8 weeks, we are sending as many pitches as we can. And I ask people to commit to finding at least 50 influencers, making themselves a list of 50 influencers, and then making 25 pitches within that 8 weeks. And then whoever sends the most pitches beyond that actually wins extra private coaching with me. But set goals, be clear about the volume and the time frame that you're going to do it. Otherwise, you just kind of, your effort drains away and dribbles away, and before you know it, you're not doing anything again. Step 3 is take aim. This is that reader persona piece. Who are you targeting? Who is your ideal reader? You should know everything about this fake person who represents your ideal reader. It should be as detailed a character sketch as you would do for a novel, right? What do they wear? What radio station is the default in when they get in their car? What's their favorite book? All of those things, the more you know, right? Just like writing, how there's specificity and power in specificity, the same is true for your marketing and knowing who you're trying to reach, because your message is going to be so much more compelling if it's as if you're talking to one person. The next step of outreach is research. So this is where, you're just going on Google and figuring out, okay, I know who my ideal reader is. Who are the right influencers? And it can be a little bit tedious, but it can also be amazing. And you'll find things in the world that you didn't even know were there that you are now completely, interested in and excited about. So that's research. Step 5 is cultivating relationships with the influencers themselves, right? So ideally, the first time you pitch someone should not be the first time they've ever heard of you. cold pitches can work. They absolutely can if you do them right. But if you have the time, you want to try to cultivate those relationships a little bit ahead of time. Step 6 is where you're actually asking for something, where you're writing that pitch, right? It's way down. It's one of the last steps. And then the delivery is you get a yes from someone, and now you need to deliver professionally and make yourself a delight to work with so that they will speak well of you, give you recommendations, and want to work with you again. So that's my like nickel tour of the 7 steps to outreach, but I didn't want to just say, hey, outreach, go find somebody, and not give you really the meat behind some of that. So the last step is selling. So selling just means that you're offering your book to the right people. You're going to add value into the world by finding the person who would most benefit from your book and making that offer for them to buy it. So that's where you're doing your outreach, you're getting people onto your email list, and then you're saying, hey, if you like that and you're on this email list, you're going to love this book. It's going to change your life or make your day or inform you or entertain you or whatever your specific mission as an author is. I have this story that is my favorite about selling that I'll tell you in a minute. But first I want to look at this idea of clean selling. Again, the marketing word people get tripped up on, and the selling word people get tripped up on. So here's how I like to look at it to clean it up. Number 1, virtuous actions have virtuous results. So if I am coming at this from the intention of doing good and finding the right people, that is going to have virtuous results, right? I'm not going to go spamming people. I'm not going to go pushing my book in people's faces. I'm going to act virtuously and make choices that are based on everybody's best interest. Writing books itself, the very act of writing a book, of making any kind of art, is a virtuous act. I think if all the writers stopped writing tomorrow and all of the artists stopped making art tomorrow, humanity would feel it immediately, right? It's a virtuous act. So you are adding value to the world. You're sharing your gifts with people who want to accept them. So that's how I like to look at it. One of my favorite stories is I was on a consult call with someone who was interested in becoming a client, and she did become a client. And we both happen to live in Portland, Oregon. And we went down a bit of a rabbit hole. I was complaining that I couldn't ever get anyone to go to karaoke with me. And she said, oh, do you know about Low Bar Corral? I'm like, what is Low Bar Corral? And she's like, oh, everybody meets at a bar once a week. There's a live band. This was before COVID. There's a live band, and there's 2 songs that we practice every week, and then everybody sings all together at the same time. And it's called Low Bar Corral, because there's like a corral, but you don't have to be good, right? You just show up. And she just started talking to me about how wonderful it was, and it was amazing, and she loved it, and I had to try it, and I had to try it. And I stopped her and I said, Melissa, do you know what you're doing right now? And she told me this whole story. She published like 12 books. She's a children's book author. She's wonderful. But she was never comfortable with the marketing thing. I don't like selling. I don't like marketing. I said, Melissa, do you know what you're doing right now? She said, what? I said, you're selling me on Low Bar Corral, right? You can tell that I am the kind of person who would benefit from Low Bar Corral. And so therefore you will not take a no for an answer because you know it's going to be amazing for me. And that's what clean selling is, right? It's finding that perfect fit and being so enthusiastic about it. Okay, so let's look at how we put this all together. The connection system, we've got all the pieces, but how does it actually work? So it actually works in a different order than how I explained it to you. Basically, you're starting with outreach, right? You're going to go out into the world. You're going to figure out who your ideal reader is, find the appropriate influencer, go and get in front of that audience. So what you're doing in front of that audience is content, right? Talking points. If you're on a podcast or the guest post, that is content. And then you're going to be inviting that audience back to your email list. So that's permission. This is why you have to have the permission set up first and why I talked about it first. And then once they're on your list, you can remind them that I'm a professional author and I have a book that you can buy and here's how it would benefit you, right? So outreach, content, permission, and selling. Let's look at a couple examples. So you can see when I start showing you these examples, various ways that you can mix and match this and scenarios that you can come up with that, again, are going to be a good fit for your specific genre and your specific ideal reader. Let's look at the first example. So you want to befriend an influencer in your space who has a popular podcast, right? That's outreach. And remember, I talked about the cultivation step of outreach. So that's outreach. That influencer didn't know you exist, and now they know you exist. You're going to pitch that influencer to be on their podcast. Again, that's outreach, because now instead of just the influencer, you're going to move that whole audience pool from knowing you don't exist to now knowing that you exist. And when you're on that podcast, that is content. At the end of the podcast, you're going to let listeners know where they can learn more about you. It's like your little elevator pitch at the end of the podcast. Ideally, you'll also have a special web page set up for them where they can go and get your freebie and they will feel special for that particular podcast. That is permission. And then the new subscriber gets a series of welcome emails with the sign-up bonus that you promised and additional content telling them about your book and about your work. So that's more content. And then every newsletter has a blurb about your book and a link to buy it. And that is selling. So that's a very simple, common example of authors I work with and what they do. And the reason you want a special web page set up is then you can track for yourself what is working. I went on this kind of podcast and I got 100 new subscribers. I went on this kind of podcast and I only got 5, right? That's going to help guide your future outreach efforts and sort of optimize what you're doing and who you're talking to. So another example, you could decide to review a book from a well-known author on your podcast or even your blog. So that's content where you're doing a book review. Then you tag that author on social media when you promote the post. That's content. And then that author shares your link. So that is outreach, because now that author, what author isn't going to say, oh, wow, somebody gave me free publicity, I think I'll retweet it, right? 9 times out of 10, they're going to retweet it or share it in whatever social media channel you happen to be on. So that's outreach, because now everyone in that author's audience is exposed to it. At the end of the podcast, you're going to end with a call to action to join your mailing list and get a sign-up bonus. That's permission. And then your newsletter will have a blurb about your book and links to buy it. And that is selling. So those are just 2 examples, but you start to get the idea and can sort of plug and play. That's where your tactics come in. Okay, well, I saw this tactic that might work for me. How does it plug into the connection system? Okay, well, that actually makes sense with my strategy. I'll try it and I'll plug and play and see what happens. So let's look at what we learned today. Number 1, we learned why marketing your book using just a bunch of tactics from the internet just is not going to work, right? It's not concrete enough. It's not enough of a strategy. We looked at a better definition of marketing. We want to build long-lasting relationships with people. It's not about just one book. Number 3, we learned that our number 1 marketing goal is to build our email list, because that is the best avenue that we have for building that long-lasting relationship. And then number 4, we learned that 4-part connection system fundamental strategy that will actually grow your audience. Next, I want you to figure out who your ideal reader is, because that is going to drive so many of the decisions that you make around content and outreach, right? How are we going to talk to this person? What do they need to hear? What do they want to hear? What's going to be interesting to them? Where do I find them? What are they listening to? What are they watching? What are they reading? You need to figure all that out, because it's going to make every single one of your decisions so much easier and so much more relevant to what you're trying to do. So to do that, you can go to pagesandplatforms.com/ProWritingAid. Do you see how I am doing a webinar as outreach? And then I'm pointing you back to my permission asset with a special link just for you, dear webinar attendees today, right? I totally practice what I preach here. The reader persona webinar is on demand, so you'll sign up and then you'll get access to it right away, and you can watch it right away and get started, and I will show you exactly how and why to build a reader persona. But now I would like to, yes, we've got 20 minutes for questions.
Yeah, awesome. So please feel free to go and drop your questions. And I know people have been paying rapt attention and really loved the examples. So for those of you who have questions for Sue about training today, or just, again, she's a book marketing expert, so take advantage of having her here. Please use the Q&A box at the bottom. And we will go ahead and use that. So someone did ask about identifying people who are relevant to review a book and how to approach them. And I know that we covered a lot of that today, but do you have any other like tips and tricks, or do you want to just reiterate some of the stuff that was covered, Sue?
Yeah, absolutely. So reviews are very, very important. The first thing that I always recommend is that people just, through all of your personal connections, you form what's called a launch team or a street team or ambassadors, and they're going to help you with outreach. They're going to help spread the word, and you can ask them to do reviews. So you want people who are intrinsically motivated, who love the genre, or who already love you. Those are great people to start your search to get reviews, and you are offering them the only really thing that you can offer to people is, by Amazon rules and other rules, is a copy of the book. So you can give them a digital copy of the book or a print copy of the book, your choice, but you're getting them to commit. I use the term loosely, but you want them to say they're committing to leaving a review. And in fact, between 10 and 25% of the people who say they'll leave your review will actually do it. So you kind of have to herd them a little bit. But start there. Start with your current audience, your current connections, the current people you know who love the genre. The next layer is that you go out and you search for book reviewers, sort of professional or hobbyist book reviewers for your particular genre. So if you Google, Kindlepreneur.com has a guest article about book reviewers for various genres. So you should be able to find that, and then by genre, it will list book reviewers. It's probably a little outdated, so you'll need to go into each recommendation for your genre and check that they're still active. But that's another great place to start, is you just start Googling who in my space is reviewing books in this, and then you are going to pitch them. We didn't have time to talk about what's in a good pitch today, but let me just start by basically saying you do not want a press release style pitch that is, that you're hitting send on, blind copying, 100 people. Don't ever do that, because it's a complete waste of time. You want to customize your pitches to the specific influencer, show that you know who they are, you respect what they do, and you have thought of an ask that is a win-win. So I could go into that for a whole nother webinar, but we don't have time, but just keep that in mind.
Awesome. Okay, so a bunch of questions coming in. So Christopher asked, do the strategies differ between fiction and nonfiction?
So the strategy, the fundamental connection system strategy, does not change. However, the way that you're executing it is going to be different, right? So the material, the freebie that you give out for nonfiction is going to be different than the material that you give out for fiction. For that, the sign up incentive when someone signs up for email, those will be very different. I think nonfiction, I write both fiction and nonfiction, and I think the nonfiction stuff is much easier to figure out some of these pieces, because nonfiction, you already have, probably an area of expertise. You have stuff that you can give, white papers and case studies and all of those things. So it's really the details of how you're executing the system that's going to change fiction versus nonfiction, but those 4 parts are still exactly the same.
Awesome. Another question on lead magnets. So does a lead magnet have to be free, or does a targeted, time-limited deep discount on books also work as an incentive?
So that's a great question. I recommend that you have a free lead magnet to get email signups. Okay. You could try doing a deep discount to get email signups, but I've used these deep discounts for when you're actually trying to sell books, right? When you're doing a push, to do a bunch of promos at one time to sell books. Maybe you're trying to hit a list, or maybe you just want a little bump in, you know, your royalty earnings for that month or whatever. But deep discounts are generally sales based, not list building based. That makes sense.
Awesome. A couple questions about finding ideal readers. So one person asks, how do you find your ideal reader when you write different genres? Another person is a nonfiction author who has written a running and health memoir and then a writing journal, and then is going to write a book on mindfulness, and you know, is struggling also to find an ideal writer as well. So any tips on finding ideal readers?
Yes. So definitely watch the webinar, but let's address the question of, I'm writing different things that might appeal to different people. So there are two possible approaches that you can do for that. One is you are looking for the thematic thread that runs through everything you do, right? So maybe it's mindfulness is running through all of those things that Haley gave as an example. So you're looking for someone who's interested in mindfulness and therefore maybe interested in all of the things that you're putting out because you have this thematic thread. Or let's say you're writing fiction, but you're writing different genres, but you always have very strong female protagonists, right? That's your common thread through all of your fiction, even though you're in different genres. So that's one way to do it. If you can find a nice, strong thematic tie and you're not sort of like grasping at straws, it makes it less work for you, because then you've got one website, sort of one organized campaign, an ideal reader that you can focus on. So that's approach number one. Approach number two, if they are really diametrically opposed, like for example, the novel I have out right now is a middle grade fiction novel. And now I'm under contract to write a book about parental leave, a nonfiction book about parental leave, right? Not the same marketing campaign. I cannot put those two together. So I just have to, you know, face the fact that I'm going to have to do two separate efforts for those. So what I recommend, because it can be, imagine you're on a soccer field and you've got two soccer balls in front of you and you try to kick both of them at the same time with one foot, right? It's not as effective as just kicking one ball at a time. So what I encourage authors to do is commit for a certain period of time to, all right, I'm going to focus on this book, which has this ideal reader for 6 months or a year. And then I'm going to pivot and switch to cultivating this other ideal reader and this other book. So you're basically switching off, but you always want to be focusing as much energy as you can into getting something off the ground, getting a book launched, building the list for that. Like, give it some focused effort if you can. So two strategies there. You can kind of look for the Venn diagram overlap of the ideal reader is going to care about all the things you're writing and why, or you take them one at a time.
Awesome. Okay, so Teresa says, I had a test reader tell me my story was too location oriented, that only those living in the general area where the story is situated would understand it. Is this something that would give me a focus reader group to market to?
Yes, Teresa. So first of all, I would always make sure when you're getting feedback on your book that the person is in your target audience, because if we're just sort of asking all of our friends and they don't read the type of book that we're trying to market, they may not have the best feedback. They may be pointing you in the wrong direction. So that's number one. But you are onto something there, right? If your story or your book has a strong geographical hook, you can do that narrow niche of that geographical market and make that a concentration, right? So your ideal reader lives in, you know, the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, right? You can get very, very specific and focus on that market. But I'd have to talk to you more to figure out if that was really the approach for your book. I'd have to know a little more. But you are on the right track of saying, yeah, that's not necessarily a drawback. I can use that in my marketing.
Okay. Is it effective to attract traffic through offering readers of my site money for publishing their articles at my site?
Okay, let me read that one again. Offering readers of my site money for publishing their articles at my site. I don't love that, Fyodor, because readers and people who are trying to publish things are generally two separate pools of people. And I don't know enough about your specific situation, but when you're right and you're looking for a win-win, right? You're looking for, I want to attract people to my site and it would be a win for them to have some money, but I think there's probably a better win-win that you can find based more on your commonality and your common goals and interests with that audience. And again, I'd have to know a little more about your genre and what you have in mind, but that's best I can do with the information I have.
Awesome. Okay, so someone asked, if I do a review for an author, should I use my real name or my pen name?
If you're the one writing the review for the author?
Yeah, so I think in the idea of like, if you're doing a review and you want to like tweet it at the author, like, and then have your upgrade at the bottom, like, should that be under like your author branding, or can it just be under like you personally?
If you have a pen name, it's better to be under your author branding so that it all ties together and doesn't confuse either the influencer or the audience. So you want to keep with the brand that you're trying to promote by doing the review of that influencer. But you could send them an email. If you're going to email them privately, in addition to the social media, you can be like, hey, this is me. This is who I am. This is my pen name, right? You can make that explanation there, but you wouldn't have room on social to really do that.
Cool. A couple tactical questions now. So somebody asked about separating campaigns. So like, how would you separate campaigns, but use one website list, et cetera? Can there be some overlap? So if they're like working for different genres or that type of thing, how would they kind of keep those campaigns separate?
Right. So it depends on how closely your campaigns are related, whether you could keep them on the same website or not. Like for my example, I can't have the same website for that. It just won't work because it won't speak to either audience if I'm trying to do both. However, there are things that are close enough. Like I have a lot of editor friends who are also authors. And so they have one website and you can do, I'm sure you've seen on homepages, like if you're interested in this, go here and there's a button. And if you're interested in that, go there and there's a button, right? So readers of thrillers go here. If you're a writer who needs an editor for thrillers, go here. So you can have sort of let them have a menu right up front. The most important thing is just clarity. Don't confuse someone who lands on your site. Let them know exactly what is on offer for them. And if it's more than two things, you're going to have to find a way to separate it out, is my advice. And then just from a list perspective, if they're really two terribly different campaigns, you want to make sure that you have them tagged in whatever system that you're doing so you can really keep them separate and send them completely different messaging. But you can do that through tags. You could do it through a whole separate list. It depends on what your email service provider does. I've used both ConvertKit and MailChimp, and I would just use tags or groups or whatever's on offer there, but do keep them separate.
Yeah, there's a couple of more questions about mailing list stuff, and I'll give you a second to take your drink. So Pamela asks, how would we set up something different? So like if they have a sign up form on their website, how would they set up something different for podcast listeners? Would it be a different page with a different pop-up or a different opt-in form?
You could actually use the same opt-in. You're just creating a separate page, landing page for that specific audience, but you can use the same opt-in that you normally use. Once you get further along, you can have 2 to 3 different opt-ins that you can kind of use for different types of audiences. And I'll circle back to that as far as reader personas in a moment. But you're basically, you have one page and I duplicate it and change the URL, and I might change the messaging a little bit, but it is, from 1 to 3 different freebies that I'm always offering.
Yeah, you definitely don't want to.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, you don't want to spend all your time creating freebies, right? Like you want to find like 2 or 3, like maybe 3, like the tops that are interesting to you. But if you're there spending all of your time creating free things and working on that, and then also doing all this book marketing, you'll never have time to write. So think about, what's a really good freebie that I can reuse with my, for my ideal audience. And that way you're not just creating all this free content all the time.
Yep, exactly, exactly. And circle back to personas for a minute, and this is in the webinar in more detail, but once you have one ideal reader, you could develop a second persona, sometimes even a third, but let's say you totally saturate the space for your first ideal reader, you can create a second ideal reader that those two would never hang out together, right? But the book would still appeal to them, maybe for a slightly different reason. And then you can move and saturate that ideal reader's space. So that's when you might want to have one or two freebies, because for, you know, people who like soccer, it would be this freebie. And for people, I can't think of an example off the top of my head, but you can tweak it a little bit.
Yeah, a couple of people asked about what are good freebies. So yeah, from a good book marketing perspective, what's a good freebie?
So it differs a little for fiction and nonfiction. And actually, when you sign up for the webinar, you'll get a bunch of resources, and one of them is a big list of sign-up incentives. So there is some overlap with fiction and nonfiction. But just real quickly, fiction, you can't go wrong with offering a short story or a novella, right? Or something that you already have that's highly tied to the book that you're actually trying to sell. You don't want them to be completely different, right? We want to give them a taste of the full experience, not just, I happen to have these poems I wrote in college laying around. So do that if you're on the fiction side, if you possibly can. If you don't have any extra fiction that you can give away, you could think about things like, all right, well, here's the most impactful books in my genre who influenced me to become a writer, and do a deep review on all of them and give that away. Something like that. That's, again, designed to solve your ideal reader's problem, whether it's they need to be entertained or they need to be informed. And then on the nonfiction side, you have so many options. Unless you're talking memoir, then it's pretty much the same as fiction. But case studies, little email courses, white papers, infographics, checklists, deleted chapters. I always want things to be like a standalone experience. Doing the first chapter of your book just doesn't work anymore. Right? It's been done to death. It just doesn't work. It needs to be a standalone experience so people don't feel like you're just like, I'm just teasing you so you'll come and buy my book, right? You want to build that relationship. What can I give them that's really great that's going to build the relationship?
Awesome. Gary asks, does controversial content narrow your audience?
Yes, but a narrow audience is not a bad thing. I am a big believer in really going for your niche audience. Your Seth Godin calls it your minimal viable audience instead of minimum viable product. It's not a bad thing to narrow your audience, and controversy can actually be a great selling point because it creates word of mouth, right? So it may initially narrow your audience, but if you can get enough controversy on it, it would probably actually expand your audience because it's getting so much word of mouth due to the controversy.
Okay, Fiona has a question on traffic attraction and writing correct code. I'm not sure if you know, if you'll know the answer to this. I will say, so Fiona, this is a great question, and I'm actually going to bring it back to our team because we haven't done a writing session for ProWritingAid on SEO for authors, and I think that like SEO and page design for authors would actually be interesting. I will say, I'm not sure necessarily about code and how coding relates to traffic attraction, but I do know that if you're wanting to get traffic to your website, you do have to make sure that like your technical and off-page SEO is just as solid as your on-page SEO. So it's not enough to be chasing keywords and, you know, formatting your headings and all of that type of stuff and making sure your images are interspersed and you have video content. You also need to make sure that technical and off-page SEO is set so that you don't have errors, you don't have duplicate content. There's literally a million factors that can affect your search ranking and traffic that comes from that. That's a really great note. I'm going to take it back to our team and see if we can get an expert to talk to you guys about that.
Oh, that'd be great. And just a note on SEO for authors and my approach too. Yes, SEO is important. You should, you know, fill in your fields, make sure that nothing's broken, you don't have bad links, all of that stuff is great, but you're basically waiting for people to stumble into your spider web, and authors get really comfortable there, right? Because a lot of us are introverts. We don't have to go out into the world and do scary stuff if we're just saying SEO is so important, I have to do this. Your return on investment is so much higher for you getting out and doing your outreach and getting in front of the audience that you know would love your book. It's just
Yeah,
way
and
more
that's
effective.
Yeah, and that's just great marketing advice in general. Like you can't just rely on one channel. I mean, if you were at the beginning of the internet, maybe your SEO traffic is amazing, but like to build deep domain authority to get a lot of organic traffic just takes a really long time, and it takes a big team of writers and just a lot. So you definitely need to be looking at multiple sources. Okay, just a couple quick final questions. So Tim asks, what are your thoughts on linking the sale of your book to charity contributions? For instance, saying 50% of the sales goes to charity X.
Tim, I think it's absolutely lovely. And especially if your ideal reader is someone who's really going to care about that, if that's going to be meaningful for them. So, but I would think of it as a very small piece of your marketing strategy, like a very small piece. You still have to get out and do your outreach and do all of the other things. It's kind of just like an icing on the cake kind of thing for a lot of readers. You still have to find them and catch their interest, right? The charitable contribution alone will not attract them.
Awesome. And then just finally, Matthew asks, do you have any tips on mail service tools, sign-up forms, et cetera? I know you have used both ConvertKit and MailChimp. Any tips on finding one that you like and that type of thing?
Yeah. So first of all, don't spin out on the decision, right? That's first and foremost, because you can waste a lot of time just putting all those little charts side by side, right? Like pick either MailChimp, MailerLite, or ConvertKit, or whatever. If you have someone in your life who already uses one and they can help you if you have a question, that's another great way to go. Don't spend a lot of time making the decision. Commit, go all in, figure out if you can spend anything. If you have a little money to make sure you can do a paid plan right away, that can just save you time later on having to switch to something else. Like I originally started with MailChimp, I switched to ConvertKit, and like ConvertKit is just so much cooler and has what I need to do. So think about, do I really hate switching things later on? Is that a factor in my decision? And then you just pick one and go. They all work largely the same. The functionality is largely the same. There are a lot of little differences and none of them are perfect, I've found.
Yeah, 100%. Nothing is perfect. And you can, just like Sue said, spend literal days and weeks just agonizing over it. So just find something that works well for you and then just go with it and don't second guess it.
Yeah, exactly. Don't look back.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Just dive all in. Well, thank you, Sue, so much. This was so useful. I know everyone got a bunch of value out of this. I've dropped in the chat, again, our links, and for Sue's training on reader personas, it's the final link, pagesandplatforms.com/ProWritingAid. Please check it out. Like she said, she's got a great list of freebie ideas in there, as well as instructions on how you can create reader personas and use those to help sell more books. So thank you again, Sue. We are so glad to have you, and everyone else, we will see you next time. All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody. Thank you. Thanks, Haley.